The old billionaire collapsed in his horse stable. But he wasn't really unconscious. Beside him lay a gold watch and a thick envelope of cash. It was a trap for his maid's poor little boy. He expected the child to steal. But the boy did something so shocking, it made the billionaire change his will forever. William Hawthorne was 78 years old, and everyone in Kentucky knew his name. He was the owner of Hawthorne Ranch, a wide, beautiful estate surrounded by rolling green hills, white wooden fences, and horse stables that looked more expensive than most people's homes. The ranch sat outside Lexington, where the air smelled of rain, hay, and old money. For decades, William had been known as a racing legend, a hotel investor, and one of the richest men in the state. But inside his mansion, William was not a happy man. He lived alone in a stone house with 30 rooms, 12 fireplaces, and silence so heavy it felt like another person in the room. His hair was silver, his face was lined with age, and his blue eyes were sharp enough to make grown men lower their voices. He always wore dark suits, polished boots, and a gold pocket watch that had belonged to his father. People said William Hawthorne was cruel. William believed he was simply honest. In his mind, kindness was usually a mask. Loyalty was something people performed when they wanted a favor. Love was a word used by relatives who needed money. His own family had taught him that. His oldest son, Richard Hawthorne, was 51, tall, clean-shaven, and always dressed like a man walking into a business meeting. Richard rarely visited unless he wanted something. He spoke politely, smiled carefully, and always found a way to mention taxes, inheritance, or selling unnecessary assets. To Richard, the ranch was not history. It was property. William's daughter, Caroline Blake, was 48, elegant and cold, with pearl earrings and a voice as smooth as glass. She called her father every few months, but never to ask if he was lonely. She asked about trust funds, family shares, and whether the mansion needed professional management. Then there was William's younger nephew, Brandon Hawthorne, 32, handsome, charming, and dangerous in the way lazy men can be dangerous when they believe money should arrive without work. Brandon often walked around the ranch as if he already owned it. William saw through all of them. He had also been betrayed by employees. A former stable manager had sold expensive feed and kept the money. A bookkeeper had hidden false invoices inside ranch accounts. Even a housekeeper once stole silver napkin rings from the dining room cabinet. After that, William stopped trusting people completely. Every smile became suspicious. Every compliment sounded like a request. Every act of kindness looked like a performance. The only living creature William still trusted was an old black racehorse named Midnight Star. Midnight Star had once been the pride of Hawthorne Ranch. He was tall, powerful, and beautiful, with a dark coat that shone under sunlight like polished coal. Years ago, he had won races across the country and made the Hawthorne name famous. But now his legs were weaker, his speed was gone, and white hair had begun to show around his muzzle. To William, Midnight Star was not useless. He was family. But Richard did not see it that way. One gray morning, Richard stood outside the main stable looking at Midnight Star with irritation. "Dad," Richard said, adjusting his expensive coat, "that horse costs more to maintain than he's worth. You should sell him before he becomes a total loss." William turned slowly. For a moment he said nothing. He only stared at his son as if he were looking at a stranger. "Midnight Star carried this family name farther than you ever did," William said. Richard sighed. "It's just a horse." William's face hardened. "No," he said quietly. "That is exactly why you will never understand this ranch." Richard left angry, but William remained in the stable long after him. He placed one hand gently against Midnight Star's neck and felt the old horse breathe. The stable was quiet, except for the soft sound of hooves shifting in hay. William looked toward the mansion, toward the windows where his children saw only money, land, and inheritance. And in that silence, something inside him grew colder. By the end of that day, William Hawthorne had made a decision. If people only revealed their true hearts when they thought no one was watching, then he would watch. He would test them. And soon, someone would walk into Hawthorne Ranch with nothing but a tired face, a frightened child, and a heart William was certain he could expose. But he had no idea that the next person he tested would be the one who changed his life forever. 3 days after Richard Hawthorne left the ranch in anger, a new housekeeper arrived at the front gate. Her name was Maya Collins. She was 29 years old, with tired brown eyes, dark hair tied back in a simple ponytail, and hands that looked older than the rest of her. Maya was not weak, but life had worn her down in quiet ways. She wore a plain gray coat, cheap shoes, and carried herself like a woman who had learned to apologize before anyone accused her of anything. She had been hired only temporarily, just until William Hawthorne decided whether she was worth keeping. The head housekeeper had quit suddenly, and the mansion needed someone to clean the guest rooms, manage laundry, and help prepare the house before winter guests arrived. Maya needed the work badly. Rent was overdue. The heating bill was waiting on the kitchen table at home, and every night she counted coins before buying groceries. Maya had once been married to Daniel Collins, a gentle horse handler who had worked at smaller farms around Lexington. Daniel had known horses better than he knew people. He could calm a frightened mare with one hand and a whisper. But 2 years earlier, he had died in a loading accident at a private stable, leaving Maya with grief, debt, and their little boy. That boy was Ethan Collins. Ethan was 8 years old, thin for his age, with messy sandy brown hair and large, honest eyes. He was the kind of child who noticed injured birds near sidewalks and hungry dogs behind restaurants. He rarely asked for toys, rarely complained, and spoke softly because he had learned that worried adults had enough noise in their lives. What Ethan loved most were animals. At home, he kept drawings of horses taped above his bed. Some were fast racehorses with flying manes. Some were old horses with kind eyes. On the corner of his small desk sat his most precious possession, an old iron horseshoe that had belonged to his father. Daniel had given it to him before he died. This brought luck to a horse that never gave up, Daniel had told him. Keep it close, buddy. Not because it's magic, but because it reminds you what kind of man to become. Since then, Ethan carried the horseshoe in the inside pocket of his jacket everywhere he went. It was heavy, rusty, and scratched, but to Ethan, it was worth more than gold. On Maya's fourth morning at Hawthorne Ranch, the snow came hard. It covered the fences, buried the gravel road, and turned the Kentucky hills white before sunrise. By 7 o'clock, the local school district announced emergency closures. Maya stood in her tiny kitchen staring at the message on her phone while Ethan ate toast at the table. Her heart sank. She had no babysitter, no family nearby, no neighbor she trusted enough. And missing work after only 4 days would almost certainly cost her the job. So Maya did the only thing she could do. She wrapped Ethan in his old brown jacket, made him promise to stay silent, and drove carefully through the snow toward Hawthorne Ranch. The car heater barely worked. Ethan kept his hands in his pockets, one small hand wrapped around the horseshoe. When they reached the mansion, Maya parked near the servants' entrance and turned to him. "Listen to me, Ethan," she whispered. "Mr. Hawthorne is not a patient man. If anyone sees you causing trouble, I could lose this job." "I won't cause trouble," Ethan said. "I mean it. You stay close. You don't touch anything. You don't speak unless someone speaks to you first." Ethan nodded, but his eyes had already moved past the mansion toward the long wooden stables. From somewhere inside, a horse gave a low, lonely sound. Ethan looked toward it with quiet concern. Maya noticed and gently touched his shoulder. "Not today, sweetheart." But Ethan kept looking at the stable. He did not know yet that behind those doors lived Midnight Star, the old racehorse his father once admired from newspaper photographs. And Maya did not know that bringing her son to work that snowy morning would place them both in the path of William Hawthorne's coldest judgment. All she knew was that she needed to survive the day. And all Ethan knew was that somewhere on that ranch, an animal sounded lonely. By late afternoon, the snow had turned into freezing rain. The sky above Hawthorne Ranch was dark and low, pressing down on the white fields like a heavy lid. Inside the mansion, Maya Collins moved quietly from room to room, polishing furniture and folding linens, while Ethan sat near the servants' hallway with a book in his lap. He tried to read, but every few minutes, his eyes drifted toward the window, toward the long wooden stable where a lonely horse had cried earlier that morning. William Hawthorne noticed everything. From the top of the staircase, he watched the boy glance toward the stable again and again. Ethan was not running around. He was not touching expensive things. He was not asking questions. But William had already decided that patience was not proof of goodness. Sometimes, he believed, people simply waited for the right chance. And a child, especially a poor child, would be easier to expose than an adult. So William prepared his test. He took his antique gold pocket watch from his vest, the same watch his father had carried before him. It was worth more than Maya probably earned in a year. Then he opened his desk drawer and removed a thick white envelope filled with cash. The bills inside were crisp, fresh, and impossible to ignore. He did not count the money again. The number did not matter. What mattered was temptation. He wanted the bait to look careless, accidental, irresistible. Outside near the far end of the property, Brandon Hawthorne was creating a trap of his own. Brandon, William's 32-year-old nephew, stood beneath the shelter of an old equipment barn, wearing a camel-colored coat and leather gloves that had never done a day of real work. Across from him stood Victor Lane, a thin real estate broker in his 40s with slick black hair, narrow eyes, and a smile that looked too practiced to be trusted. Victor held a folder against his chest to protect it from the rain. "My uncle is old," Brandon said, lowering his voice. "He barely leaves the house anymore. Once the estate changes hands, the south pasture will be available." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Available legally?" Brandon smirked. "It will be. Just prepare the offer, quietly." While Brandon whispered about selling land that was not his, William walked toward the stable with his cane tapping against the frozen path. He chose the largest stall corridor, where the light was dim and the scent of hay filled the cold air. Midnight Star stood in the last stall, his black head turned toward William as if he sensed something was wrong. William placed the gold watch and the envelope on a low wooden feed crate near the center aisle, making sure both were clearly visible. Then William lowered himself carefully onto the hay-covered floor. He leaned one shoulder against the wall, let his cane fall beside him, and closed his eyes. His breathing became slow, heavy, and uneven, like a man who had collapsed from weakness. But behind his still face, his mind was awake and sharp. He was listening for footsteps. He had already instructed Maya to bring fresh towels to the tack room. He knew she would not come alone, not with Ethan watching the stable all day. A few minutes later, the stable door creaked open. Cold wind swept through the aisle, carrying snowflakes and rain. Maya stepped inside first, holding a folded stack of towels. Ethan followed close behind, small and silent, his hands buried deep inside his worn jacket pockets. Maya did not see William at first. She was looking toward the shelves near the tack room, but Ethan stopped immediately, his eyes fixed on the old man lying on the floor. Beside William, the gold watch caught the weak light. The envelope of cash sat open, its edge lifted just enough to show the money inside. William kept his eyes closed, waiting. He imagined the boy's face changing when he noticed the watch. He imagined the small hand reaching down. He imagined Maya's excuses. In his mind, the lesson was already written. People took what they could. Poor people simply had fewer chances to do it. But Ethan did not move toward the money, not yet. He only stared at the old billionaire on the floor, his face slowly filling with fear. Ethan Collins stood frozen in the stable doorway, staring at William Hawthorne's body on the hay-covered floor. The old billionaire lay beside the wooden feed crate, his cane fallen near his hand, his eyes closed, and his chest rising in slow, heavy breaths. Maya had not noticed yet. She was still carrying the towels toward the tack room shelves, whispering for Ethan to stay close. But Ethan could not move. He saw the gold watch first, shining beside William like a piece of sunlight in the dark stable. Then he saw the open envelope, thick with cash. For one brief second, his eyes rested on both things. Then they moved back to William's face. "Mom," Ethan whispered, but Maya was too far down the aisle to hear him over the rain striking the stable roof. Ethan took one careful step forward. He did not reach for the money. He did not touch the watch. He knelt beside William and leaned close, just as his father had once taught him to do when a ranch hand fainted from summer heat. Ethan held his small hand near William's nose and mouth, feeling for breath. Warm air brushed his fingers. The old man was alive. Ethan's shoulders loosened, but worry still filled his face. William, behind his closed eyes, felt the boy's hand hovering near him and waited for the theft that never came. The stable was bitterly cold. Wind slipped through the cracks between the wooden boards, and the damp floor made the chill even worse. Ethan looked around quickly and saw a folded horse blanket hanging over a stall gate. It was old, brown, and rough, but it was dry. He ran to it, pulled it down with both hands, and dragged it back across the hay. Carefully, he spread the blanket over William's chest and legs. "You're cold," Ethan murmured. "Dad said cold makes weak people weaker." His voice trembled, but his hands were gentle. He tucked the edge of the blanket near William's shoulder, treating the frightening old ranch owner like someone who still deserved care. Only then did Ethan notice the envelope again. It had slipped closer to the wet patch of hay near the aisle, where melted snow had blown in through the stable door. The corner of the envelope was already damp. Ethan frowned, not with greed, but with concern. He reached out slowly, using only 2 fingers, and pushed the envelope back onto the dry part of the crate. Then he picked up the gold watch by its chain and placed it beside the envelope, farther from the floor. "Safe now," he whispered, as if the money and watch belonged to someone important and needed protecting. William heard the words clearly, and something inside him went still. From the last stall came a low, painful sound. Ethan turned his head. Midnight Star stood with his black coat dull under the dim stable light, one back leg lifted slightly off the ground. The old horse's ears flicked nervously, and his breathing sounded uneven. Ethan rose and walked toward him slowly, one palm open. "Easy," he whispered. "I'm not going to hurt you." Midnight Star shifted, revealing a shallow cut near his hind leg just above the fetlock. It was not bleeding heavily, but the skin was torn, and wet straw clung to it. Ethan's face changed. He knew that look of pain. He had seen his father treat frightened horses before. Ethan pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket. It was the one Maya had folded for him that morning. With slow, careful movements, he tied it loosely around the wounded spot to keep dirt away. He did not pretend to be a doctor. He only did what a kind child could do. He stroked Midnight Star's neck and whispered the words Daniel Collins used to say, "Hold on, buddy. Help is coming." Across the aisle, William Hawthorne remained still beneath the blanket, but his thoughts were no longer cold and certain. The boy had been left alone with money, gold, and power. Yet he had chosen warmth, protection, and mercy. William Hawthorne opened his eyes with a rough groan, as if he had just returned from a deep and painful sleep. Ethan stepped back at once, startled, while Midnight Star shifted nervously in the last stall. Maya rushed from the tack room with the folded towels still in her arms. When she saw William on the floor under the horse blanket, her face went pale. She looked at Ethan, then at the gold watch, then at the envelope of cash, and terror filled her eyes. William slowly pushed himself upright, acting weaker than he truly was. But his voice came out sharp and angry. "What," he growled, "is going on here?" Maya dropped the towels and ran toward him. She was trembling so badly that she nearly slipped on the damp hay. "Mr. Hawthorne, I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "I only brought him because school was closed. He didn't mean any harm. Please, sir, I'll take him away right now." Ethan opened his mouth to explain, but Maya pulled him behind her. She knew rich men like William could destroy a poor woman's life with one sentence, one complaint, one accusation, and she would lose the only job standing between them and eviction. William looked down at the horse blanket covering his coat. Then he touched the sleeve of his expensive dark overcoat, where damp straw had stuck to the fabric. His face hardened. "Do you know what this coat costs?" he asked. Maya shook her head, unable to speak. "Italian wool," William said coldly. "Custom made. And now your boy has dragged a dirty stable blanket over it like I'm some farmhand sleeping in the mud." Ethan's eyes widened. "I was only trying to keep you warm, sir," he whispered. William snapped his gaze toward him. "I did not ask you to touch me." From the back stall, Midnight Star gave another uneasy sound. William turned toward the horse and made his voice even harsher. "And my horse," he said. "You went near him too, didn't you?" Ethan swallowed. "His leg was hurt." William struck his cane against the floor. "That horse is worth more than your mother will earn in 10 years. What if you frightened him? What if he kicked the stall wall and injured himself worse?" Maya pressed both hands to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Please blame me," she begged, "not him. I'll work without pay. I'll clean every stall, every room, anything you want. Just don't fire me. Please don't punish my son." Ethan stepped out from behind his mother. His face was pale, but his voice was steady in a small, heartbreaking way. "No, Mom," he said. "It was me." Maya reached for him, but he gently moved away. Ethan put one hand inside his jacket and pulled out the old iron horseshoe his father had given him. It was rusty, scratched, and heavy in his little palm. "I don't have money," Ethan said to William, "but this was my dad's. He said it belonged to a horse that never gave up. It's the best thing I have." His fingers tightened around it for one last second before he held it out. "If I ruined your coat or scared Midnight Star, you can keep it." The stable became completely silent. Even the rain seemed softer against the roof. William stared at the horseshoe in Ethan's hand, and the anger he was pretending to feel suddenly turned into something real and painful inside his chest. The boy had not stolen the watch. He had protected the money. He had covered a cold old man and cared for an injured horse. And now, instead of letting his mother carry the blame, he was offering the only treasure he owned. William did not take the horseshoe. He only looked at Ethan, shaken by the terrible purity of the child's sacrifice. William Hawthorne stood in the middle of the stable, staring at the rusty horseshoe in Ethan's small hand. For several seconds he could not speak. The anger on his face faded, and what remained was something Maya had not expected to see from a man like him: shame. Slowly, William lowered his cane and took one step back. "Put it away, boy," he said, but his voice was no longer cruel. Ethan blinked. Maya held her breath. William looked at the gold watch, the envelope of cash, the blanket, and then the frightened mother and child before him. "The coat is not ruined," he said quietly, "and Midnight Star is not angry because of you." Maya frowned, confused and still afraid. "Sir?" William rubbed one hand over his tired face. "I was never unconscious," he admitted. "I pretended to collapse. The watch and the money were placed there on purpose." Maya's eyes widened with hurt. Ethan looked down at the envelope, then back at William. The old man's voice grew heavier. "I wanted to test you. I wanted to prove that if poor people saw gold and cash within reach, they would take it." He swallowed hard. "But your son did not take anything. He checked if I was breathing. He covered me. He protected my money from the wet hay. Then he cared for my horse." The words struck Maya like cold water. For a moment, sadness replaced fear in her eyes. "You used us?" she whispered. "Because we looked poor enough to steal?" William did not defend himself. "Yes," he said, "and I was wrong." He turned to Ethan, whose hand still rested near the pocket where he had hidden the horseshoe again. "You made me ashamed, Ethan. Not because you proved you were good, but because you proved how ugly my suspicion had become." His voice cracked slightly. "I have been cheated by people with polished shoes, expensive watches, and my own last name. But I judged you because your shoes were worn." Before Maya could answer, Midnight Star gave a weak, painful sound from the last stall. Ethan looked toward him immediately. William turned as well, and this time he did not pretend not to care. He walked to the stall and saw the handkerchief tied carefully around the old horse's injured leg. His face tightened. "You saw this?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "It wasn't deep, sir, but there was dirt in the hay. My dad said wounds get worse if nobody cleans them." William's expression shifted from surprise to urgency. He pulled out his phone and called Dr. Helen Price, the ranch veterinarian, a calm woman in her 50s known for treating champion horses with both skill and patience. "Come now," William ordered. "It's Midnight Star." While they waited, William sent Owen Miller, the ranch's security supervisor, to check the stable cameras. Owen was a broad-shouldered former deputy with a gray beard, quiet manners, and loyal eyes. William wanted the footage saved, partly because of the test, partly because he suddenly felt the need to protect Maya and Ethan from any future accusation. But when Owen returned with the tablet, his face looked troubled. "Mr. Hawthorne," he said, "you need to see something else." The screen showed a view from the equipment barn earlier that afternoon. Brandon stood with Victor Lane, signing papers beneath the shelter while rain fell around them. William watched silently as his nephew pointed toward the south pasture on the map. Dr. Price arrived before William spoke of Brandon. She examined Midnight Star's leg, cleaned the wound, and confirmed Ethan's quick action had likely prevented infection. "Who tied this handkerchief?" she asked. William looked at Ethan. "He did." Dr. Price smiled gently. "Then this boy may have saved you a serious problem." William turned to Maya, and for the first time, his pride completely fell away. "Mrs. Collins," he said, "I owe you and your son an apology. You will not be fired. You will stay at Hawthorne Ranch, if you are willing. And Ethan?" He paused, looking at the boy with new respect. Any child who protects an old man, a fortune, and a wounded horse in one afternoon belongs here more than most people with the Hawthorne name. After the day in the stable, Hawthorne Ranch slowly became a different place. William Hawthorne did not become warm overnight, but something inside him had shifted. He paid every overdue bill Maya owed, not as charity, but as what he called back wages for a lesson I should have learned years ago. Then he made a quiet promise to Ethan Collins. Every school fee, every book, every uniform, and every future college expense would be paid by him. Ethan did not fully understand the size of that promise. He only knew that his mother stopped crying over envelopes on the kitchen table. Maya Collins remained at Hawthorne Ranch, but she was no longer treated like a temporary housekeeper hiding at the edge of someone else's life. William saw her discipline, honesty, and patience. Within 2 years, he asked her to help organize his private donations. By the 4th year, she became director of the Hawthorne Foundation, a charity that supported poor children, single parents, injured workers, and families who had been crushed by medical bills. Maya was still humble, still careful with every dollar, but she learned to sit across from bankers and lawyers without lowering her eyes. Ethan grew up between classrooms, stables, and William's old library. In the mornings, he went to school. In the afternoons, he studied business with William, who taught him contracts, land values, payroll, and the danger of trusting smooth words without proof. But Ethan also learned from the grooms and veterinarians. He mucked stalls, brushed horses, carried feed, and sat quietly with frightened animals until they calmed down. William sometimes watched from the doorway, pretending not to be moved. The boy had not lost his softness, he had simply grown stronger around it. Midnight Star became Ethan's closest companion on the ranch. The old horse never raced again, but he healed well enough to walk slowly through the pasture. Ethan visited him every day, often carrying apples in his jacket pocket. Over time, Ethan began inviting children from the foundation to meet the horse. Many of them had lost parents, homes, or confidence. They were nervous at first, but Midnight Star was gentle. He lowered his head for small hands and stood patiently while children whispered secrets into his mane. Ethan realized the old stable could become more than a place for animals. It could become a place for healing. By Ethan's 16th birthday, the unused West Stable had been rebuilt into the Midnight Star Therapy Center. It welcomed grieving children, children from poor families, and sons and daughters of injured farm workers. Maya handled the foundation grants, William paid for trained therapists, and Ethan volunteered after school. The center became known across Kentucky not because it was luxurious, but because it felt safe. Above the entrance hung a wooden sign with Midnight Star's painted silhouette. William insisted on one rule: no child would ever be turned away because their family could not pay. Brandon Hawthorne, meanwhile, lost the future he thought he had already stolen. The security footage of him meeting Victor Lane was enough for William to remove him from every business discussion, every ranch account, and every advisory board connected to the estate. Brandon protested, smiled, apologized, and blamed confusion. But William no longer listened. Richard and Caroline also learned that their father's patience had limits. For 10 years, they watched Ethan become part of the ranch they had taken for granted. And by the time Ethan stood tall beside William in the stable aisle, everyone could see the truth. The poor boy William had once tested had become the heir in everything except name. William Hawthorne passed away on a quiet spring morning, 10 years after the day Ethan Collins first walked into his stable. He died peacefully in his bedroom overlooking the pastures, with the curtains open and the sound of horses moving in the distance. Maya was the first to find him. Ethan arrived moments later, no longer a frightened little boy, but a young man of 18 with steady shoulders and eyes full of grief. On William's nightstand sat a folded note addressed to him, but Ethan did not open it yet. He only held Maya's hand and whispered, he wasn't alone anymore. 3 days later, the Hawthorne family gathered in the mansion library for the reading of the will. Richard Hawthorne sat in front with his arms crossed, wearing a black suit and an impatient expression. Caroline Blake dabbed at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. Brandon Hawthorne stood near the fireplace, smiling like a man trying to look sad while already counting money in his head. Across the room sat Maya and Ethan, quiet and respectful. Behind them stood Owen Miller, Dr. Helen Price, and several workers from the ranch who had loved William more honestly than his own blood ever had. The family attorney, Margaret Ellis, A silver-haired woman in her 60s with sharp glasses and a voice that allowed no interruption, opened the document. She read first to William's children. Richard and Caroline would receive the trust funds created for them years earlier, along with the homes and investments already placed in their names. William's words were direct. "I leave you what you always came for, nothing less and nothing more." Richard's face darkened, but Brandon still looked confident. He expected the real fortune to come next. Then Margaret turned the page. "To Brandon Hawthorne," she read, "I leave $1 and the full forgiveness of an old man who saw clearly before it was too late." Brandon exploded. $1? This is illegal." Margaret lifted a folder from the table. Inside were security recordings, signed statements, business records, and proof of Brandon's secret attempt to sell the South pasture. "Mr. Hawthorne prepared for your objection," she said calmly. "Challenge the will, and these documents become public record." Brandon's face went pale. For the first time in his life, charm could not save him. Finally, Margaret looked at Ethan. "To Ethan Collins, I leave Hawthorne Ranch, my companies, my remaining investments, and the responsibility to use them better than I did." The room erupted. Richard shouted. Caroline stood in disbelief. Brandon accused Ethan of manipulation, but Ethan did not answer them. Margaret continued reading William's final words. "10 years ago, I placed gold and money beside my body to prove the world was rotten. A poor boy proved instead that my heart was. He protected my fortune, my horse, and my dignity when I deserved none of it. He gave me back my soul. This estate belongs to the boy who understood value before he understood wealth." Then Margaret handed Ethan a small wooden box. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside lay his father's old horseshoe, no longer rusty, but polished and plated in gold. Across the curve, William had engraved, "The boy who protected what money could not buy." Ethan broke down. It was not the fortune that made him cry. It was the fact that William had kept the one thing Ethan once offered to lose for his mother. Maya wrapped her arms around him, and for a moment the angry voices in the room seemed far away. Brandon did sue, but he lost before the case could become a spectacle. William's evidence was airtight, the will was ironclad, and every witness confirmed the truth. Ethan never sold the ranch. Instead, he expanded the Midnight Star Therapy Center into the Hawthorne Academy, a free home of learning and recovery for poor children, single mothers, abandoned workers, and families who had been forgotten by people with power. The racing trophies stayed, but they were no longer the pride of the estate. The children were. On the first morning the academy opened, Ethan walked alone to Midnight Star's old stall. The horse had passed the year before, but his name lived above the doorway. Ethan placed the golden horseshoe on a polished wooden stand beside the stall, where every child would see it before entering. He touched the engraving, smiled through tears, and remembered a cold day, a cruel test, and an old man who had changed before it was too late. Then Ethan whispered the words that had started everything. "Safe now." That day, when I placed my father's old horseshoe beside Midnight Star's stall, I finally understood what Mr. Hawthorne had taught me. God does not always change a life with thunder, miracles, or grand signs from heaven. Sometimes he uses something small, a cold stable, a frightened child, an old horse, and one simple act of kindness. Mr. Hawthorne thought he was testing me, but maybe God was testing his heart too. And in the end, a man who had everything learned that the greatest treasure was not money, land, or power. It was love. It was mercy. It was the courage to do what is right when no one is watching. So tell me, if you were in Ethan's place, would you have helped the old man after seeing the money and the gold watch? And if you were William, could you admit you were wrong before it was too late? Write your answer in the comments. I truly want to know what you think. And if this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next powerful and emotional story waiting for you.